What if the person you hated most in life were, in fact, the one who has always been destined to be yours? Hi, I'm Yuna, and I welcome you to Happiness of Love. Get ready for an exciting story that will leave you amazed. Enjoy the video, and may God bless you and your entire family. Have an amazing day. Los Angeles, 8 hours and 32 minutes in the morning. Ren Moreau, 32, threw the pen on the mahogany table with a heavy sigh, his dark brown eyes fixed on the document in front of him. Subscribe and end it at once, Ren. His father's firm and controlled voice sounded across the room, impatiently. That was the 13th contract that he refused to sign in a year. The role in front of him symbolized everything he despised: to renounce the command of the Lumiere and to assume the empire of civil construction of the Moreau family. He looked up at the man who insisted on dictating the course of his life. Richard Moreau, a cold, relentless tycoon, who never accepted the fact that his only son chose to run a jewelry company instead of following his footsteps. Ren ran a hand over his perfectly aligned black hair and reclined in the leather chair. Do you want me to throw out everything I built? Everything my mother built? His voice carried a sarcastic tone, but his tightness on his jaw revealed his irritation. Richard frowned, the hard strokes accentuated by the impeccably adjusted tie. Your mother liked to play jewelry. You're a Moreau. And Morietes build empires, no earrings and necklaces. Nausea rose through Ren's stomach, but he kept the expression impassive. He already knew this color speech. If this is an empire, then why do you need me so much? He arched his eyebrow with a lazy smile, the one who wore whenever he wanted to piss his father. Richard snorted, pushing the chair back. You are wasting your potential, Ren. But that won't last forever. He took the contract and kept it in the leather paste with a sudden gesture. 1 hour, you will realize that I am right. Ren just smiled sideways, watching his father leave the office without saying goodbye. As soon as the door closed, he allowed himself to take a deep breath. He would never assume the construction company. It would never let the Lumiere fall into the hands of those who did not understand the value of their legacy. Across the city, Hannah Parker, 30, stepped on the lobby of Los Angeles International Airport, pulling his wheeled suitcase with a determined movement. The familiar smell of coffee and the crowd mingled with the bittersweet sensation of being back. 5 years since he had left the United States to study in France. 5 years since he had the displeasure of meeting Ren Moreau and his unbearable ego. She laughed alone, remembering each discussion, every time he challenged her in the classroom, every provocative look she released whenever she was second in some assessment. I hated admitting, but the rivalry with him made her grow up. Made her an even better jewelry designer. Now she was back. And nothing nor anyone would be on your way. As soon as you passed the automatic doors of the airport, your phone vibrated. Mark, welcome, Hannah. I hope you at Lumiere at 10 o'clock in the morning. We have a lot to talk. You will love this opportunity. She smiled. A new beginning. It was all she wanted. As Hannah went to the center of Los Angeles, Ren adjusted the fists of his white shirt, looking at the city through the huge windows of his office at the top of the Lumiere building. Your phone rang. Without taking his eyes off his sight, he answered. What is it, Mark? On the other side, his partner's animated voice echoed. I need you to come to the meeting room at 10 o'clock. I brought an amazing person to lead the design of our new collection. Ren rolled his eyes. I pay you to run business, not to hire people without consulting me. Mark laughed. Trust me, Moreau. You'll love this hiring. Across the line, Hannah descended from the taxi in front of the Lumiere building, having no idea what she awaited her. Los Angeles, 10 o'clock in the morning. Lumiere headquarters. Hannah looked up at the imposing sheep of glass and steel in front of her. The Lumiere. The name shone in an elegant sign on the facade, reflecting the grandeur of the company she dreamed of being part. A cold traveled his spine, not fear, but of pure excitement. That was the moment. Breathing deep, adjusted the navy blue blazer, and ran his fingers through the impeccable fabric of the pencil skirt. Her heart throbbing hard, not just for her professional challenge, but because that was her chance to finally dig his name in the jewelry design world. The revolving door slid softly when she entered, and the sophisticated coffee and leather aroma surrounded her. The lobby was a masterpiece of modernity, with a crystal chandelier that captured the sunlight and dispersed it in golden reflexes. Everything there was luxury. At the reception counter, a blonde woman with a professional smile received her with an evaluative look. Good morning, Miss Parker. Mr. Mark awaits her in the 10th 5th floor. Hannah thanked him and went to the elevator, feeling every beat of his heart echo in the closed space. When the doors opened, Mark was already there, with open arms and a wide smile. Hannah. Finally. He wrapped her in a warm hug, moving away to analyze her from top to bottom. You are even more amazing than the last time we saw each other, she smiled, feeling genuinely welcome. And you are still the same, always exaggerated. Mark laughed and gestured to follow him through the glass hall. I have a lot to show you. And I'm sure you will love to work here. At the same time, in the CEO room, Ren was leather chair, spinning a pen between his fingers. The morning had already been unbearable with his father, and now Mark wanted him to know this new mysterious hiring. He sighed, squeezing his eyes. All I wanted was a day without surprises. The door opened without ceremony. Ren, I want you to know our new senior designer. Mark's animated voice filled the room, but Ren barely registered. His eyes settled in the figure that emerged behind him, and for a second the world stopped. No. It couldn't be. But it was. Hannah Parker. The woman he hadn't seen for 5 years. The woman who challenged each of her victories in the course of France. The woman he swore never crossed the way again. His eyes met, and the shock was immediate. Hannah felt as if she had been hit by lightning. Ren Moreau. No. This is not happening. The same pretentious air. The even more striking features than he remembered. He was even louder, more imposing, dressed in a flawless suit that seemed tailor-made to exhale arrogance, and by the expression that took over his face, he was not happy to see her there either. Mark, oblivious to the sharp electricity that filled the atmosphere, smiled. Ren, this is Hannah Parker, our new no. Ren's voice cut the air like a sharp blade. Mark blinked, confused. What? Ren got up slowly, resting his hands on the table, his jaw tense. She can't work here. Hannah narrowed her eyes, feeling a wave of irritation taking over her body. Oh, is it? And why? Ren stared at her, the fire of the rivalry 5 years ago burning as if he had never been erased. Because I don't trust your work. Mark widened his eyes. Hey, come. What's going on here? Hannah crossed her arms, fighting the desire to throw her bag in Ren's face. Let me see if I understand. Don't you trust my work? She laughed, without humor. Because if I remember well, it was you who got annoyed when I got higher notes than yours. Ren closed his face. And if I remember well, you just got those grades because I pulled the teacher's bag. Hannah arrested, incredulously. You are still as childish as before. What surprises me is that you have the courage to go back here after the shame that passed in France. Shame? She advanced a step. Are you talking about the prize I won and you don't? Ren gave a crooked smile. Loaded with poison. No. I'm talking about the necklace you designed and was rejected in the final assessment. Hannah felt the blood boil. That necklace. It was the greatest failure of his career. And Ren knew that. The silence between the two was heavy as steel. Mark, feeling the imminent disaster, raised his hands. Okay, I understand that you have a history. Interesting. He looked at Ren. But Hannah was my personal choice. You told me you trust my trial yourself. Ren inspired deeply without taking his eyes off Hannah. I trust your trial. But I don't trust her. Hannah opened her mouth to counter, but stopped. She could simply leave. Refuse to work with such an unbearable man. But then he looked around. Lumiere was her dream. She struggled to get there. If I left now, Ren would win. He took a deep breath and shrugged. Well, Moreau. You'll have to put up with me. Ren tilted his head, evaluating her like an opponent. So be it. Hannah stared at her reflection in the elevator mirror, inspiring deep. Her brown hair was stuck in a flawless bun, discreet makeup enhanced her soft skin and her eyes shone with determination. Today it would not be easy. She left the elevator on the 15th floor, where the design department was, and the vision made her momentarily without breath. The creative heart of the Lumiere was a spectacle. Glass walls allowed natural light to flood the environment, enhancing the marble counters where scratches, precious stones and developing pieces were exposed. The art happened there. But his admiration was interrupted the moment he heard that voice. Punctuality. At least a positive point for you, Parker. She turned slowly. Ren Moreau leaning against the glass door frame of his room, he looked at her as if about to have fun at his expense. He wore a flawless gray suit, his arms crossed, his face marked by the usual half-laden smile. Hannah kept the posture upright. I wouldn't let him shake her. Good morning to you too, Moreau. His voice came out sweet, but with a sharp touch enough to cut the air. He watched her for a long moment, and then stepped forward. I hope your first week here will be productive. Hannah felt a shiver up the spine. Here comes. Hannah was organizing her table when Mark appeared with a tablet in her hand, smiling as if nothing was wrong. I need you to work on the new Lumiere project, he announced. She raised an eyebrow. Already on the first day? I'm impressed, Mark. Hesitated. It's just that, let's say it's a direct request from the CEO.it was then that Ren came after him, holding a small black velvet case. He opened it, revealing a tear-shaped cut diamond. This is one of Lumiere's best-selling jewels. Ren started, turning the piece between his fingers. A classic and timeless design, beautiful, Hannah admitted, narrowing her eyes. Great. Because your task is to redesign you, she blinked. What? Ren closed the case and put his hands in his pockets. I want something innovative. You have until Friday to introduce me an improved version of this design. Hannah analyzed the ring again. It was an iconic piece of the Lumiere. To move it would be like rewriting a classic. She found Ren's gaze. He was testing her. If he said it was an impossible job, he would win. If he failed, he would use it against her. She crossed her arms. No problem. I'm going to do something 1,000 times better than this old-fashioned piece. Ren smiled, pleased. Let's see if your words have value, Parker. The day passed in a blur of meetings and sketches. Hannah was immersed in the project when she smelled the strong smell of coffee and realized that someone had put a cup right next to her drawings. She lifted her eyes slowly. Ren was leaning over the table, analyzing his sketches with false chance. Interesting, he commented, having a sip of coffee. But do you really think this curve works? It seems a little rigid. Hannah forced a smile, picking her cup and drifting her gently. If you want to give suggestions, Moreau, you can wait until I finish the design. He walked away, but not without first smiling. Just trying to help. She narrowed her eyes. He was trying to distract her. The next day Hannah was in the Lumiere cafeteria when he heard stuffy laughs. As soon as he took his request and sip, he frowned. Sugar. She never had sugar coffee. He looked back and saw Ren across the hallway, leaning against the wall with a glass of his own coffee. Smiling. He raised the glass lightly, as if he offered. Hannah took a deep breath. Did you move in my coffee? Ren raised his eyebrows, pretending innocence. Me? Never. But I heard that a little sweetness could improve your mood. She closed her eyes for a second. What an unbearable man. But if he wanted to play, then she would play too. On the afternoon of the same day Ren entered his office and frowned. His chair looked different. As soon as he sat down, the right wheel slid suddenly, and he had to hold the table so as not to fall. He heard a muffled laugh outside. Hannah passed the door, smiling. Problem with the chair, Moreau? He stared at her, evaluating. Is that you? She blinked innocently. Ren. I don't know what you're talking about. He squeezed his eyes. Do you want to play? Hannah tilted her head. You have already started the game. Dear. The two stared at themselves, sparks practically visible between them. This was far from over. Hannah closed her sketch notebook and stretched her arms, feeling the tension accumulate on her shoulders. 3 days. 3 days of intense provocations of Ren Moreau. 3 days trying to overcome the challenge he imposed on her. 3 days fighting the unbearable desire to throw one of the diamonds on that man's head. She took a deep breath, massaging the temples. The good news? The ring design was finally taking shape. The bad news? She couldn't get Ren out of her head, whether for his constant provocations or the way he crossed his arms and watched her with that calculating look. He was always there, hovering like an arrogant and irresistibly annoying ghost. It seems exhausted. The voice came from behind, soft and friendly. Hannah turned and found Mark, backed by the glass door of her living room. Her smile was welcoming, and he was holding a glass of coffee to her. She accepted, grateful. Mark was like a breath of fresh air in the middle of that storm called Ren Moreau. You are an angel. She sighed as she gave the first sip. Mark smiled. I wish I had passed here before, but my afternoon was chaos. How are you going with the ring? I think I found the right direction, Hannah replied, showing one of the sketches on the clipboard. Mark leaned over and nodded. It's beautiful. I always knew that you would bring something special to the Lumiere. Hannah smiled, feeling the warmth of gratitude in her chest. It was good to be recognized by someone who really believed in her. Mark hesitated for a moment before continuing. I know Ren can be complicated. But if you need something, I'm here. Hannah frowned, analyzing his expression. Was there something in your voice, a more than professional interest? She opened her mouth to answer, but before she could say anything, the door opened abruptly. Ren. His gaze immediately fell on Mark, and something in his posture has changed. His eyebrows arched slightly, and a crease came between them. I interrupt something? Hannah felt a sudden pleasure in seeing him bothered. Just a moment of rest, he said calmly. Ren ignored the answer and turned to Mark. I was looking for you. The Sotheby's event was anticipated for tomorrow. We will need someone from the design team there. Mark pointed to Hannah. So she should go. Ren was silent in half. The idea clearly did not please him. Hannah, on the other hand, settled in the chair. I find it an excellent idea. Ren arrested his lips on a tense line. Excellent. So be ready. But try to do nothing to embarrass the Lumiere, she smiled, leaning slightly to him. I can't promise anything. Ren's eyes shone in challenge before he came out without saying anything else. Mark laughed softly beside her. He definitely didn't like it, Hannah shrugged. It's not my problem. But as she watched the door where Ren disappeared, she wasn't so sure. Ren threw the keys on the kitchen marble table and loosened his tie with an annoyed movement. Mark. He and Hannah were too close. It was not your account. It should not be your account. But why the hell did he feel that discomfort in his chest to see them together? He served a glass of whiskey and threw himself on the couch, running his hand through his hair. Hannah had been a stone in her shoe since she returned to Los Angeles. She irritated him. She challenged him. But the worst of all? She intrigued him. And now, Mark was clearly interested in her. Ren snorted. He didn't care. And tomorrow, at the event, I would make a point of proving it. Hannah has never been at a Sotheby's event before, and now he understood why he was so exclusive. The mansion that housed the auction was a masterpiece of classic architecture, with imposing white columns and crystal chandeliers illuminating the night. The environment exuded luxury. She adjusted the black silk dress and followed the hall, where the world's largest jewelers and collectors were gathered. Awesome, isn't it? The voice came from his left, and when he turned, he found Ren. Hannah blinked. She had never seen him like this. He was different. The perfectly adjusted black suit, the slightly loose tie, the woody perfume by mingling with the refined aroma of the environment. For a moment, just a moment, Hannah forgot that she hated him, but then he smiled that annoying way. I didn't know you knew how to behave in such an event, and the magic has broken down. I didn't know you knew how to smile, she countered, drinking a sip of champagne. Ren leaned slightly at her. Very close. I just smile when I see someone striving so hard to impress me. Hannah arched an eyebrow. Impress you? Not even in your best dreams, Moreau. He opened his mouth to answer, but was interrupted by Mark, who approached casually. Hannah, you need to see one of the new pieces that will be auctioned. Ren walked away, but Hannah didn't miss the sharp look he threw Mark. And when Mark offered her arm to her and Hannah accepted without hesitation, Ren took a long sip of her drink, feeling something warm and annoying to climb through the chest. In the middle of the night, Hannah was analyzing an exposed piece when she felt someone by her side. She didn't need to look. I already knew who it was. Do you really think Mark is the best company for you? She laughed, without turning around. And since when do you have any opinions about it? Ren was silent for a moment. Then, to his surprise, he took the glass she held. You're drinking very fast, he said simply. She frowned. So what? He tilted his head. You have a tendency to talk too much when you drink. Hannah opened her mouth to counter, but realized what had just happened. Ren Moreau was taking care of her. Her heart hit a faster fraction, but before I could say anything, Ren gave a corner smile. Make no mistake, Parker. I just don't want you to play silly role in front of important investors. And with that, he walked away. Hannah stood there, holding the empty glass, and for the first time, she didn't know what to feel. Ren turned the whiskey glass between his fingers, his eyes fixed on the dance floor where Hannah and Mark laughed at something he couldn't hear. It bothered him more than he should. He hated the way Mark made her smile as easy, as if everything was light, simple. He hated the way his hand was casually resting at her waist, as if he had every right to be there, and above all, I hated the fact that it could not look away. It's going to break the glass if you keep squeezing like that. Richard Moreau's voice sounded behind his back, low and cluttered with disdain. Ren didn't have to turn around to know that his father watched him with that clinical and calculating look. What do you want? Ren asked without emotion, taking the glass to his lips and taking a long sip, trying to ignore the presence of the man who always knew exactly how to piss him off. Richard sighed, pulling one of his seats next to him and settling. With the calm of those who always had control of the situation. You're wasting time here, son. Ren clenched his teeth. There we go. If you came to talk about the construction company, you can save your breath. Richard released a low laugh. You have always been stubborn. A trait that pulled from his mother. Ren diverted Hannah's eyes and turned his attention to the man he called his father. The reference to the mother was always a dirty attempt at manipulation. The Lumiere is doing well, he said, keeping his voice controlled. You saw the numbers yourself in the last quarter, and I see beyond the numbers, Richard countered, crossing his hands on the table. I know you're fighting something inevitable. Lumiere is not for you. Never has been. Ren's jaw was reeded. How many times have you had this same discussion? You want me to throw out everything I built, he said, staring at his father in his eyes. Richard watched him for a moment, then gave a half smile, taking a white linen napkin and cleaning a non-existent corner of the mouth. Always impeccable. Always controlled. No, Ren. I want you to stop pretending that this company is yours. Ren felt something inside him, but did not allow his face to reveal anything. Like always, subscribe to the papers, Richard continued. Sell the Lumiere and go back to where it really belongs. Ren expired slowly, feeling suffocating pressure on his chest. He would never sign those papers. And yet, an insidious doubt whispered in the back of his mind. And if his father was right, Hannah descended the stairs of the mansion with careful steps, still feeling the lightness of champagne in the thoughts. The night had been surprisingly pleasant. Mark was a great conversation companion, and the sophisticated atmosphere of the event made her feel that she was finally in the right place. But when his eyes captured Ren, standing next to a black car with his hands in his pockets, an inexplicable squeeze appeared in his chest. Something in it seemed wrong. He no longer had the usual arrogant posture. It was distant, almost dark. Hannah hesitated before approaching. Is everything okay, Moro? Ren looked up at her, and for a moment she saw a tiredness she had never noticed before. But then he blinked, and like a magic pass, the insolent and convinced look came back. Why wouldn't it be? Her voice came dragged, a little hoarse. Hannah crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes. Because you have this face of those who want to punch a wall. He laughed softly, but did not answer. The silence between them extended, loaded by a tension that Hannah could not define. It was different. It was not anger. It was not rivalry. It was something more dangerous. Something that made your stomach turn and your senses get sharper. You're drinking too much lately, Hannah commented, watching the glass he was holding. Ren revolved the amber liquid before responding. Maybe it's the only thing that still makes me sense, she frowned. That sounded too honest. Ren sighed, massaging the back of his neck. He didn't want to be there, standing next to Hannah Parker, feeling vulnerable. But somehow she made the weight of the night look less suffocating. And that scared him. Hannah felt the air around them change, and suddenly realized how close they were. Too close. She should say something. Should move away. But then Ren leaned slightly, the dark look holding hers with an intensity that made his heart fire, and for a second, she was sure he was going to kiss her. But before anything happened, the event door opened sharply behind them. Hannah, Mark came, smiling as he descended the stairs. And as if a spell had been broken, Ren moved away. Immediately. He rarely was exalted, but when it happened, it was a spectacle of destruction. We need an official response, another director intervened. The press is demanding a statement, and the investors? Ren questioned. Actions plummeted 15%. Within hours. If we don't do something now, the Lumiere may not recover. Ren expired slowly, without deviating his father's eyes. He knew. I knew Richard had something to do with it. The timing was too perfect. But before he could answer, an unexpected voice broke the silence. What if we look at the suppliers of this lot? Everyone turned around. Hannah. She sustained the looks. Without hesitation, there may be an error in the production chain, he continued. If we can prove that sabotage came from outside, we can reverse the narrative. There was a moment of silence. Then Richard laughed. Interesting. The new designer now specializes in crises. The tone loaded with poison made something boil inside Hannah. But before she answered, Ren leaned forward. She's right. The advice was surprised. I want a complete survey of suppliers and distributed lots, Ren continued. Let's prove that this was sabotage. Hannah noticed the look he thrown to his father. Challenge loaded. Richard just smiled. Good luck, son. I hope you can save your business. That was not a desire for good luck. It was a warning point. 11 hours and 45 minutes in the morning. RN office. The door closed behind them, and as soon as they were alone, Hannah turned to him. This is Frame, isn't it? Ren massaged his forehead, exhausted. Of course it is. Hannah crossed her arms. Your father. It was not a question. Ren snorted. Who else? The silence extended. For a moment, Hannah saw something she had never seen before in Ren. Where? The arrogance mask was cracked. The usual coldness was more fragile, and it stirred her in a way that shouldn't. He was fighting alone. She expired slowly. I'll help you solve this. Ren looked up at her, surprised. And why the hell would you do that? Hannah hesitated before answering. Because, as much as she wanted to deny, she cared. Because the Lumiere was important to her. And because, somehow inexplicable, Ren Moreau was. But she wouldn't say that. Then he just lifted his chin and gave a provocative smile. Because I'm better than you. Ren laughed, shaking his head. And for the first time in days, something inside it seemed less heavy. Hannah was sitting on the design room floor, surrounded by document stacks, metal samples, and supplier tables. Hours and more hours of research, and yet nothing concrete. She squeezed her eyes, feeling exhaustion weigh on her body. Something was there. She felt. The numbers didn't beat. The falsified jewelry lot had come from a supplier that was not in the internal records of the Lumiere. But how the hell did this happen without anyone noticing? Still here, the hoarse and tired voice came from the door. Hannah looked up and found Ren leaning against the stop, the loose tie, the jacket thrown over her shoulder, and the sleeves of the rolled shirt. He looked exhausted. And for the first time, it didn't seem to try to hide it. Someone needs to solve this mess. As the company's CEO is busy drinking whiskey and staring at nothing, Ren smiled, weak but genuine. You never stop provoking, right, Parker? She shrugged. It's my favorite pastime. He entered the room and sat on the floor beside her, taking one of the leaves that were scattered. They were silent for a moment, the only sounds being the rustle of the papers and the distant noise from the city outside. Until Ren broke the silence. I know it was my father. Hannah arrested her breath. She looked at him and saw that there was no doubt in his expression. Ren Moreau has always had a way to mask everything: pain, frustration, fear. But there, sitting on the floor beside her, he was not pretending anything. He wants me to sell Lumiere, Ren continued, without looking at her. And now you found a way to force me to do that. Hannah watched his profile to the weak light of the room. The tense jaw. His hands tight on his knees. This was destroying Ren. And the truth was that she hated seeing that. You won't let him win. Ren laughed, but without humor. I'm not so sure. Hannah felt something inside her turn around. She never saw Ren Moreau doubt herself. And hated every second of this. She turned to him, ignoring any remnants of pride or rivalry. You can't give up. Ren finally looked at her. And that's when it happened. The confession. I don't care about Lumiere as much as I care about you. Hannah blinked, the brain struggling to process what he had just said. But Ren didn't stop. Since you showed up, my life has become hell. His voice was loaded, hoarse, as if struggling to speak. You take me seriously. You challenge me. You are everywhere, Parker. And I hate how much I like it. Her heart shot. She opened her mouth, but no word came out. Ren took a deep breath. His dark eyes trapped in hers. Waiting. But Hannah didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know how to process the fact that Ren Moreau, the man she spent years hating, was there, vulnerable, saying she felt something for her. And before he could find an answer, his phone rang. Ren closed his eyes, running a hand through his hair before answering. He speaks. Whatever has been said on the other side made his body stiffen. Hannah noticed immediately what it was. Ren turned off the call and rose from a jump, picking up his jacket and throwing it over his shoulders. My father is in a meeting now with potential buyers. Hannah's stomach rolled. Is he already negotiating the sale of the Lumiere? Ren didn't answer. Just left the room as a storm about to destroy everything in her way. Hannah didn't hesitate. Went after him. Ren entered without beating, his chest rising and down with anger. Richard was sitting with a glass of whiskey in hand, as if he already waited for him. You knew I would come. Richard gave a half smile. You have always been predictable. Ren clenched his fists, advancing to the table. How did you have the courage to destroy my business? Richard took a slow sip of whiskey before answering. She was never yours. Hannah arrested her breath next to Ren, watching her father and son exchange sharp glances, like two predators ready to attack. Do you think you can break me? Ren hissed, his voice low and dangerous. Richard got up, walking to him with the calm of a man who knew he had already won. I don't need to break you, Ren. Your tone was almost kind. You're already broken. Hannah felt something explode inside Ren at that moment. He advanced to his father, the anger burning in his gaze. But before she did something impulsive, Hannah held her arm. Ren paralyzed to the touch. She said nothing, just squeezed lightly, reminding him that he was not alone. That was enough. Ren took a deep breath, retreating. He turned to Richard, now with a cold look like steel. This is not over. And with that, he left. Hannah followed right behind. But before the door closed, she heard Richard murmur softly, almost as if talking to himself. You have no idea what is coming, son. And a chill traveled his spine. Ren walked around his apartment, his face still loaded with tension. Hannah watched him, sitting on the couch, trying to find words. But how to deal with all that? With his confession? With the revelation about Richard? With the possible fall of the Lumiere? She rubbed her eyes, exhausted. We need a plan. Ren stopped, turning to her. We have an important event at the end of the week. His voice was now stable, controlled. He was focused. Hannah nodded. The only chance to rebuild Lumiere. Ren took a deep breath, so he looked at her with an intensity that made her lose her air. And you will be by my side. Hannah didn't know if he was talking about the event or something much bigger. The air between them cooled, And he recovered his indifferent pose in the blink of an eye. We see each other in the office, Parker, and with that, it got into the car and left. Hannah remained there, her heart hammering hard against her chest, not knowing exactly what the hell had just happened. Since that night, something was different. Ren avoided Hannah whenever he could. But when his eyes were, the tension was almost palpable. Hannah got up thinking about him more than he would like. Thinking about what almost happened that night. Thinking about the fact that she didn't want him to leave. And it was in this whirlwind of thoughts that she caught herself looking at the red paste on Ren's table, the folder that contained the proposal to sell the Lumiere. Your stomach rolled. Was he considering selling the company? What did that mean? To her? For everything. For what did you work for? And, above all, why the hell did that bother her so much? Los Angeles, 7 hours and 15 minutes in the morning. Explosive headlines. The insistent sound of the phone vibrated against the marble table while Ren Moreau opened his eyes with difficulty. 4 lost calls. 3 from Mark, 1 from the legal department. His stomach turned. This was not a good sign. He took his cell phone and, as soon as he saw the notifications on the screen, felt a cold weight set up on his chest. Lumiere scandal, counterfeit jewels in circulation? CEO Ren Moreau involved in fraud? Investors ask for answers. Is the luxury empire ripe? Ren's mouth dried up. He threw the covers to the side and got out of bed in a quick movement, feeling his heart hollow in his chest. What the hell was going on? He died to Mark without thinking twice. The partner's voice came urgently. Finally. Where the hell were you? Ren ran a hand through his hair, crossing the room already towards the bathroom. Sleeping. What is happening? We're fucked, that's what's going on. Mark was not dramatizing. This made Ren stop halfway. Tell me now. There was a tense silence on the other side before Mark released the bomb. A lot of necklaces from our collection was denounced as falsified. An influencer exposed a video on social networks, saying he bought a play that was not really gold. The media took it and turned into a scandal. Shit. Ren felt the blood freezing. This is impossible. I know it is. But the question is not what we know, but what the world is seeing. The advice is already calling you to an emergency meeting. Ren closed his eyes for a second, trying to organize his thoughts. Falsification? In Lumiere? That would never have gone unnoticed by him. Unless, he swallowed hard. Someone was sabotaging his company. And he had a good idea of who could be. Hannah passed through the Lumiere lobby and immediately realized the difference in the environment. The air was loaded. Employees whispered in small groups, and the anxious looks turned to the screens, where the crisis headlines ran in real time. That didn't look good. She squeezed her step to her room, but before she could get in, Mark appeared beside her. We need you at the meeting now. She frowned. What is it about? Mark sighed, rubbing his face. The worst possible scenario. It was enough to make her follow without question. The climate inside the room was pure chaos. The Lumiere Council, consisting of 6 advanced age directors and austere glances, huddled around the long glass table. In the center of everything, Ren. He was sitting, the rigid expression, the dark eyes as the approaching storm. But Hannah realized the detail that the others might not notice, and their fingers were slightly tensioned on the table. He was holding on. Richard Moreau was on the other side of the room, the only one who seemed relaxed. Too relaxed. One of the directors hit the table. This is unacceptable, Ren. Our credibility is at stake. Do you think I don't know that? Ren's voice came out. Low but sharp. Hannah arrested her breath. The sun was beginning to be born over the city, dyeing the skyscrapers with golden tones, but Ren Moreau could feel nothing but overwhelming pressure on his chest. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, his elbows backed on his knees, his gaze set on the floor. Today was the day, the most important event in the jewelry industry, Lumiere's last chance to prove it was not over. If it failed, it would be the end. Ren ran his hands over his face, exhausted. But physical tiredness was insignificant compared to the chaos that dominated his mind. Your father tried to destroy him. The media painted him like a corrupt and incompetent CEO. And in the midst of all this, Hannah Parker. The woman he should hate. The woman who somehow became the only thing that prevented him from crumbling. The memory of his confession returned in full force. I don't care about Lumiere as much as I care about you. Her silence after that was deafening. Ren hated not having control of the situation. But now, he didn't know what to do with his own feelings. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't fail. He would not lose the Lumiere. And God would help him. He would not lose Hannah either. Hannah had a sip of strong coffee and closed her eyes. For a second, trying to calm her rapid heart. She was sitting at her table, the event documents scattered in front of her. But your mind was anywhere except there. Ren. Since he confessed to his feelings, she could no longer think straight. He threw that bomb over her and simply moved on, as if nothing had happened. And the worst? She didn't want it to be a lie. Hannah. let out a heavy sigh, running her hands through her hair. She spent years hating Ren Moreau, fighting him. But now things were different. And the scariest? She didn't want her to be like before, lost in the thoughts. The voice came from the door, and his heart leaned. Ren. He was there, leaning against the stop, with that damn impeccable suit and the serious expression. But there was something more in his eyes. Something that made her want to get lost completely. I'm trying to organize everything for the event, Hannah replied, keeping her voice firm. Ren just nodded, crossing his arms. The silence between them extended, loaded, dense. Until he took a deep breath and said, "Base, we need to talk." Hannah felt a knot form in the stomach. Not now. Ren arched an eyebrow. And when then, she looked away, restless. He stepped forward. Too close. "You can pretend it didn't happen, Parker. But I won't." Her heart hammered her chest. She opened her mouth to answer, but was interrupted by the sound of the room door opening. Abruptly, "You need to see that," Mark rushed, holding his cell phone. Ren and Hannah exchanged a look before taking the device. And what they saw made Ren's blood freezing. Richard Moreau was on TV, giving an interview about the Lumiere. About him. Richard Moreau's voice filled the meeting room, broadcast live throughout the country. The Lumiere has been a pillar in the jewelry world for decades. But unfortunately, under the leadership of my son, the company deviated from its values. Ren clenched his fists. With the falsified jewelry scandal, many people came to me, worried about the brand's future, Richard continued. And as someone who wants the best for this company, I'm willing to intervene. Hannah felt her stomach turn. He wants to take the Lumiere. Ren released a dry laugh, but his eyes were dark. He always wanted to. The journalist on TV continued, "Mr. Moreau, there is rumors that the Lumiere will be sold soon. That is true?" Richard smiled, that calculated smile that Hannah learned to hate. "Let's just say that soon the Lumiere will be in good hands again." Ren's blood boiled. It was the end. If he did not save the Lumiere now, his father would win. And Ren refused to let this happen. Ren turned to Hannah, his eyes burning with determination. "I'll end it." Hannah nodded, feeling the same fury grow inside her. "How?" Ren took his cell phone and dialed a number. "I'll expose my father." Hannah widened her eyes. "Do you have tests?" Ren gave her a sharp look. "I always knew he would try something like that. And I am prepared." Hannah felt a shiver travel her spine. Ren Moreau would not fall without a fight. And for the first time, she realized that she didn't just want to save the Lumiere. She wanted to save Ren. The Grand Rosewood Hotel salon shone with the splendor of the high jewelry world. Crystal chandeliers reflected the light on luxurious dresses, champagne bowls, and journalists were accoured around the red carpet, waiting for the decisive moment for the Lumiere. Hannah was stopped for a moment at the entrance of the hall, absorbing the scene before him. So many people. So many expectations. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the night on his shoulders. She was never intimidated. But this time, I knew I couldn't fail. Beside him, Ren adjusted the cufflink of his impeccable black suit. But Hannah realized the tension in her posture, the rigid shoulders muscles, her dark eyes sweeping the hall like a king about to get into war. He turned to her, and his eyes met. No words, no provocations. Just a silent pact. Together, Hannah nodded lightly, and Ren did the same. Then they came in. The stage lights came on when the event host took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Lumiere Jewelry Gala." The audience applauded, but the buzz of speculation was impossible to ignore. The falsified jewelry scandal still hovered over the brand, and many of those present were there only to witness their fall. At the bottom of the room, Richard Moreau watched the scene with a discreet smile. He was sure Ren couldn't save Lumiere tonight. But then Hannah Parker took the stage. The hall fell into an expectant silence. Hannah held the microphone firmly, her heart hammering in her chest. But when he looked up at the audience, all insecurity disappeared. "Good night, my name is Hannah Parker, and I had the honor of leading Lumiere's newest collection." Her name was whispered among the guests. "A novelty. A change." Hannah continued, the voice firm. "In recent days, much has been said about the Lumiere. Accusations were made. Rumors were scattered. But tonight, let's not talk about scandals. Let's talk about jewelry. Let's talk about art." She took a deep breath and smiled slightly. "Let's talk about what really matters." And then the curtains opened. The hall arrested the breath. The illuminated catwalk revealed models parading the new collection. Unlike anything the Lumiere had already presented before. Modern pieces, innovative, but loaded with tradition. Gold and platinum fused in a unique way. Diamonds and sapphires combined in bold cutouts. Each piece told a story. And each of them brought something new. Hannah arrested her breath when her eyes on the audience began to change. Enchantment. Surprise. Fascination. They were conquered. And then the applause began. and increased. Until the entire hall was cheering. The collection, Hannah got off the stage and found Ren next to her. He said nothing. He just looked at her as if he was seeing something for the first time. She smiled, and he smiled back. And for a moment there was no more rivalry. Ren took the stage soon after. The hall silenced again. He looked at the audience. And then his gaze found his father at the bottom of the room. For a moment neither of them diverted. But Ren knew what he had to do. He took the microphone and spoke. For years, the Lumiere represented more than just jewelry. She represented passion, art, tradition. He paused, and above all, I represented my mother. A murmur toured the audience. Richard Moreau stiffened, but Ren didn't stop. My father tried to buy this company. Tried to make me give up on her. He tried to convince me that Lumiere was never mine. He looked up at Richard, but he's wrong. The hall was absolutely silent. Lumiere has always been mine. And it will always be. Applause exploded in the room, and in the crowd, Richard Moreau finally looked away. He had lost. Ren descended from the stage. And the first person he saw was Hannah. She looked at him like no one else had ever looked at it before. And without thinking, he pulled her by the hand and took her away. Ren and Hannah were outside the hotel, away from the flashes, away from the crowd. The night was cool, but all inside Ren burned. You saved the Lumiere, Hannah said softly. He let out a weak laugh. You too. Hannah opened her mouth to answer, but he stepped ahead. Too close. She felt her breathing failed. I need to know. His voice was serious, intense. That night, when I said I cared about you, Hannah swallowed hard. Now there was no way to escape. Ren raised his hand and brushed his fingers on her face. It was the smoother thing he has ever done. Do you feel the same? The world around it disappeared. Hannah felt her whole body beg to say yes. But then a thought hit her like a blow to the chest. What if that was a mistake? What if after all, did he hurt her? Fear froze your words. She stepped back, her eyes shining with confusion. Ren saw. And whatever was in his eyes broke. The silence between them was unbearable. And then Ren did what he never did before. He gave up. Not saying anything, just backed down, took her last look and got in the car, and as he watched he left, Hannah felt. Something inside her was escaping. Something that maybe she could never recover again. In Los Angeles, 3 months later, the golden light of the late afternoon invaded Hannah's office in the Lumiere, reflecting on the vials of metal paints, on the brute stones scattered on the table, in the drafts that filled each corner of the space. The place where your art came to life. She held a newly finished necklace, analyzing every detail. It was its most ambitious creation so far. A strong but delicate piece. Classic but innovative. Just as Lumiere had become. Just as she felt, sighing. Hannah put the necklace over the support and leaned back in the chair. His name was now recorded in the Lumiere history. Design director. She got it. And yet, why didn't it seem enough? Why, even after everything, there was an empty space inside her that could not fill? She knew the answer. I always knew. Ren Moreau, since that night, since he looked at her, waited for an answer and she couldn't give. Hannah knew something between them had broken. Ren didn't insist. Did not try. He just left. And that hurt more than anything. The phone on his table vibrated, bringing her back to reality. A notification, Lumiere event CEO speech in 15 minutes. Hannah hesitated for a moment, before releasing a deep sigh. She needed to go. Even if your heart was faster than it should, the event hall was crowded, full of guests, investors, designers. But Hannah could only focus on him. Ren Moreau was in the center of the stage, holding the microphone firmly. The same man. And at the same time, completely different. He looked stronger, safer, more himself. A few months ago, Lumiere was on the edge of the collapse. Ren began, his deep voice echoing through the hall. We lost credibility. We were tested. But, as always, we are reborn. The guests applauded, and Hannah arrested their breath. Ren looked up at the audience, and for the first time that night his eyes met hers. And then he smiled, a smile that was not arrogant. It was not a provocation. It was just Ren, and at that moment, Hannah knew. I knew it didn't matter how much she tried to ignore. No matter how long it had passed. She was still his. And maybe it had always been. Ren's room was silent when Hannah came in, closing the door behind her. Ren was standing near the window, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his look at the city outside. He didn't seem surprised to see her there. You finally came. Hannah crossed her arms. Were you waiting? He turned slowly, his dark eyes shining with something dangerous. Something familiar. Always, her heart hit hard. But there was still one thing that needed to be told. She stepped forward. That night, when you said. She hesitated, holding her breath. Do you still feel that? Ren didn't look away. I never stopped feeling. The words were simple, but loaded with everything that was in silence. Hannah felt a knot in her throat. I was afraid. Ren nodded, as if he knew, and now, she swallowed hard. And then, without thinking, without hesitation, she crossed the space between them and kissed him. Ren did not lose a second. He pulled her against him, his fingers sinking into her hair, as if he was waiting for it for a lifetime. Because maybe it was. Because maybe everything had taken them there. The rivalry. The fights. The hatred. The desire. Each provocation, every intense look. Each moment. They always belonged to each other. Days later, Ren was sitting behind his office table, his feet resting on the furniture, a relaxed expression on his face as he watched Hannah. She was on the other side of the room, analyzing a new design, her hair stuck in an elegant bun, her shirt slightly unbuttoned after a long day at work. She bit the tip of the pencil, concentrated. Ren smiled. If you keep biting this pencil like that, Parker, I'll have to take you. Hannah looked at him, arising an eyebrow. You can't take everything you want, Moro. Ren tilted his head. You said that last time. Hannah crossed her arms. So what? He smiled. And see where we are now, she snorted, but failed to hide the little smile that threatened to emerge. They still teased each other. But now, the game was different. Because now they were exactly where they should always be. Together. Our story for today comes to an end, friends, but before we say goodbye, I need your help to keep this rhythm of stories alive. If this story moved, inspired, or simply entertained you, don't hesitate to give this video a like. It's as simple as a click, but it means the world to us. Do you want more stories like this one? Then subscribe to Happiness of Love and don't forget to activate the notification bell so you never miss any of our new adventures. Remember, we have a new video every 2 days. Share this video with your friends and family. Who knows? You might inspire someone to make a positive change in the world. Leave us a comment letting us know which part of the story touched your heart the most. We love reading your thoughts and connecting with you. And if you're watching this on your phone, don't forget to hit the hype button to show your enthusiasm and help us reach even more people with these inspiring stories. Thank you for being part of the Happiness of Love community. Your support is like the heartbeat of this channel, vital and full of life. Oh, and before you go, check out the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another amazing story you won't want to miss. See you in 2 days with another story that will take your breath away. Until then, keep the rhythm of love and inspiration alive, one beat at a time.